Now, the funding to stop the spread of HIV has been increasingly an issue in the face of the economic downturn. One group trying to ensure that diseases like AIDS do not suffer as a result is the Friends of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. The group is involved in educating and engaging U.S. decision makers on what the importance of continuing to fund the Global Fund is. And joining us now is the president of Friends, Deborah Derrick. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So if you could give us a status update on the funding situation for mostly in African countries which still bear the brunt of the impact of this disease.
Well, the Global Fund has been putting out about $3 billion a year of grants to help people with AIDS, TB, and malaria. And actually, despite the economic downturn, it has held pretty steady. And I think that that's one of the reasons for that is that there is very strong support around the world for health investments and for fighting HIV/AIDS. And as we're heading into a new World AIDS Day announcement, I think it's a good time to reflect on just how valuable these investments are and how committed the U.S. government is to it.
Now, we've heard Dr. Sidibe say, and maybe it wasn't in this particular interview, but more than 7 million people worldwide are now on antiretroviral drugs,
right,
of which 4.2 million funding came from the Global Fund.
Right.
So how is the Global Fund able to sustain this kind of funding for such a huge volume of people?
Well, they get funding from across the board from governments and from the private sector and from individuals and philanthropists. It's a broad-based public-private partnership, and it's one that has had terrific success at getting people to invest in their activities.
In Africa in particular, the U.S., of course, is one of the largest donors of the Global Fund in particular.
Yeah.
Some have raised the issue of politics playing into the issue of giving funding, say in the case of Zimbabwe. Do you see a lot of that? And since the U.S. is such a significant part of this?
You know, one of the beautiful things about it is it's completely a bipartisan issue. And if you look at funding trends, of course, it was started under the Bush administration. And so it was kicked off by both the left and the right here in the United States. And over time, we have managed to maintain bipartisan support for the Global Fund. And that's been, I think, a result of the fact that it's a really solid investment. And the other thing that's great about health is you can track whether or not you're succeeding. So if you can say the number of orphans that have been helped, the number of women who have been able to prevent the transmission of AIDS to their babies, it's quite a measurable investment.
Now, the fact that there's so many diseases, of course, and just when you talk about just the Global Fund alone, its mandate is to not only address AIDS, but tuberculosis and malaria,
right,
which are also really serious problems on
Very.
the continent. So how does one, ensure that AIDS still remains a priority, tuberculosis still maintains its priority, as well as malaria, which when they combine can really be devastating for somebody who's afflicted with HIV?
Right, and it's a complicated formula. The Global Fund has recently been going through a relook at how it's apportioning its funding across diseases and across countries. But you're right, it's a complicated situation, and there are many, many things that need addressing.
Tell us, moving forward, how sustainable funding is, especially for African countries. Is the move to continue providing donor funding, or for individual countries to start trying to generate their own means?
Well, I think one of the basic underpinnings of the Global Fund is to engage people on the ground in the countries, in the ministries of health and in other sort of civil society activities to build capacity on the ground, so it is not permanently a donor recipient relationship. And so that's one of the things that's unique about the Global Fund, and one of the things that I think will ultimately make it a sustainable institution and effort in the end.
So just briefly, from your standpoint, things are looking up.
It's looking great.
Africa.
It's a terrific set of investments. I went to Zambia recently, and people were just so appreciative of everything.
And Zambia is, I believe, has achieved universal access, more than 80%.
Yeah.
On ARVs.
And I saw a couple of missions on the ground, and people were just first incredibly appreciative of the U.S., appreciative of all the politicians in the United States, appreciative of the Global Fund and the rest of the world for investing, but also had really taken on board the promise of treatment for AIDS, TB, and malaria, and what they can do for their citizens.
Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's Deborah Derrick, is the president of the Friends of the Global Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. Now, for more information on any of today's stories, please visit us online at voaafrica.com and be sure to befriend us on facebook.com/voainfocus.